as part of our ongoing series of articles, videos, and podcasts in the Fan Creator series, where we speak to a fandom creator. I am joined by a larger-than-life figure in the world of Star Wars fandom, probably best known as longtime co-host of RebelForce Radio, a podcaster and a radio professional. He's seen Star Wars 500 times. I'm joined by Jimmy Mack. How are you today, Jimmy?
Great, Mike. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. I've been wanting to do this for a very long time. Now, Jimmy, I mean, let's just get straight into it. As co-host of RebelForce Radio, and for many years now, you're clearly part of the OG Star Wars generation, as am I. I saw Star Wars, I'm not going to call it episode 4. I saw Star Wars in the cinema in 77 when I was 4 years old. Could you just tell me how you discovered the franchise and how your interest grew initially?
Like you said, original generation, and I was 8 years old in 1977. So I was right in the wheelhouse for target audience for Star Wars. And when it hit, it was sort of it wasn't a big like bomb was dropped. It was something that sort of like spread like a flood almost, you know, and then the water would eventually reach you and then you would submerge in it and then get out on the dry land as a Star Wars fan. And that's kind of how it went for me. I primarily made it through most of summer of 77 without seeing the film. It wasn't until very late in the summer when the buzz finally caught up to me. I was in my mom's kitchen one morning and she was going to make some sandwiches, and out of the Wonder Bread fell a trading card, and that was the Tusken Raider. And I sat there and stared at that trading card forever and took it outside. I showed my friends and they're like, oh yeah, we've seen Star Wars. I'm like, are there more guys just as ugly as this guy in that movie? I was fascinated by him. So shortly after that, convinced my dad to take me and my brother to go see it for the first time. And we got to the theater 15 minutes late, got there when 3PO was emerging from the oil bath in the Lars family garage as Luke was fiddling around with R2. And somehow I was able to keep track of it for the most part. The visual stuff just was stunning to me. I'll never forget seeing the X-Wings unfold their wings and turn into X's. I didn't see that coming. That was a shock to me. You take that ship design is such a given nowadays. But I remember in 1977 when those wings split apart on that starship, I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. Didn't see it coming. And so it was so fresh. It was so revolutionary. And it really began to seep into my soul in the following weeks. And I just wanted to see it again and see it all the way through this time from the very beginning. So then I convinced my mom to take me to see it. And that pretty much began an obsession. I remember after seeing it all the way through for the very first time, which was my second time seeing it. I just remember when the movie was over, I was like, wow, you know, George Lucas I have to consider him a best friend. And at this point, I really didn't even know what a director was. It was just his name was the first name at the end of the credits, and you knew it was his thing because of all the hype and everything. But that's when I really started to feel like this is something that's going to become a big part of my childhood. And it did. Everything from action figure releases to comic books to hanging out with friends and being that young, actually playing Star Wars, which is something, you know, you don't find yourself doing so much as an adult, but there's so many costumers out there. I think that's what they're chasing. But, you know, playing Star Wars on the playground after school or just talking to friends about what might happen in the next movie. And then that went on all throughout my childhood up until the 8th grade when then I moved on to high school. Return of the Jedi dropped and I saw it, and it just felt like a conclusion to my childhood in many ways. Little did I know that it was going to extend into adulthood in such a profound way, but it most certainly has. But that's really how it started. It was just a major part of my childhood. And I think for a lot of kids who grew up in that era, they would tell similar stories, especially the ones who are still super fans to this day, like I am all these years, 40 something years later, you know.
There's a couple of things that you've touched on there that I think are really key to, I suppose, unlocking. And there's a lot of movie studios and merchandisers and corporates who've been trying to discover the recipe to the secret sauce here, really. But I think in relation to fandom, you mentioned this idea of play, of imaginative play with Star Wars. I'm just curious to see, do you feel that maybe that's part of why the Star Wars fandom is so vociferous, that so many people had their imaginative awakening with the accoutrements of this franchise, and that gives perhaps that sense of ownership? Have you got any feelings around that?
I think that's something that's sorely lacking these days. It's so funny that you bring this up, because I was looking on one of the social medias today, and a guy posted a picture of his kid. I'm gonna pull it up because I want to do this post some justice. And it was a guy, he posted a picture of his kid, and it was just taken, today or yesterday, whenever he took the post. But the kid was sitting at the kitchen table, and he had a ton of Star Wars action figures on the table, and he's really just like deeply in concentration, and he's got his head down low to the table where he's by all these action figures, and they're orchestrating some kind of scene there. And the guy says, "Dear Hasbro, this is why Star Wars action figures are important. They help build worlds with our children beyond the 3D. They enable storytelling, and they feed aspiration. I had to order all of these 3 3/4 inch figures online, but he loves them to death." So I think what this poster is saying is that why isn't this stuff more accessible to kids nowadays? You go into the stores and you see nothing but empty pegs where Star Wars action figures should be hanging. But kids, given the opportunity, will sit down with these things, remove the iPad, remove the iPhone, turn the TV off, turn the computer off, and put a kid down at the kitchen table with these action figures and watch his imagination soar. And that's what this photo represents to me, is this guy, trying to maintain the traditions of imagination and encourage it, and encourage and inspire the imagination for a whole new generation. And, when you think about toys, they're just, you think about it just being silly and unnecessary, but are they really? I don't know. I think there's a lot of educational benefit and a lot of cerebral benefit that kids get from playing with physical toys. That
it's a creative outlet.
Yes. And we had to do that out of desperation back in the 70s because we didn't have on-demand anything.
What's the phrase? Necessity is the mother of invention, and I think that certainly applies here.
Well, we needed it because we had the one Star Wars film, and there were no DVDs. VHS was a total rarity in 1977. We had the
Super 8 highlights if you were very lucky. And
I remember those.
And the soundtracks were hugely important in that, filling that void, that home void. I'm curious, Jimmy. I mean, you speak of your childhood, and I think we've all, as you suggest, had very similar experiences. I'm just wondering, as you move into adolescence, and I mean, before we get to obviously you returning to your fandom in earnest through the Force cast. What were those sort of intervening years? Did you step away from the franchise and rediscover it? What was that period like?
Yeah, high school for sure. Even just prior to high school, summer of 1983 was when I graduated from 8th grade and was going into my freshman year of high school. And before Return of the Jedi hit the theaters, I spotted the action figures swinging on the pegs, all new, a ton of them, for Return of the Jedi. And I said, my little brother's going to like these. I didn't think, by that point, I was like 14 or something, 15. I didn't think that buying toys would be appropriate for me. I felt like I had outgrown it. I was still very excited to see Return of the Jedi and saw it several times that summer, but it was kind of like the door was closing shut on my childhood at that time. I was moving on. The Star Wars was moving on. We knew it was going to be the last one and everything. So it was kind of symbolic to me in many ways. I didn't reconnect with Star Wars until several years later. By chance, I was given a ride home from school. This was a junior year in high school now. So I must be 16 or 17. And I was getting a ride home from a friend of mine who had to stop off at a toy store to pick up a gift for his nephew. And so this is 1986, I want to say. And I was going to just sit in the car and wait for him. But he said, "You want to come in?" And so I said, "Okay, sure." And I went in there, and right by the register, there was a big wire basket from floor to about waist deep, filled with Star Wars Power of the Force action figures, the ones with the coin. And they were only like 50 cents each. They were on clearance. Nobody wants Star Wars in 1986. It was dead. And so I spent every dime I had on those action figures that day. I was thrilled. And just getting that rush again that I never imagined I would get.
And what was that rush? Was that a reconnection with a simpler time in your life? What do you think was going on there in your mind when you experienced that sudden realization that this was still appealing to you?
You know, I think I was having dreams about walking into stores and seeing all new Star Wars action figures. I was missing it. And I was still watching it on VHS and stuff, maybe, once a year or whatever, but it wasn't part of my regular day-to-day existence. And just seeing those figures there, because I think it was also the shock of seeing a bunch of action figures that I never knew were produced. I think that had a big deal to do with it. Oh my God, I didn't know they made one of these. I didn't know they made
There was a sense of incompletion almost, that collector gene, perhaps.
Yes, something kicked back in. Something kicked, and the other thing is I owe my mom a lot, because when I made my way into high school and everything, she had some garage sales and was moving junk from our childhood with our permission, of course. But Star Wars was never brought up. It was never the superheroes, the $6 Million Man, the G.I. Joe, that all went in the garage sale. But Star Wars was never, ever on the table. And my mom knew this. And she thought she would save all that stuff because she knew how much it meant to me and my brother. And then our kids would play, her grandkids would get to play with that stuff. And she was right. The grandkids get a look at that stuff sometimes. But no, they've played with it too. I've let my kids play with all of the toys I played with when I grew up, because what's the point? They're already played with. I kept my stuff in great shape and everything. But just knowing that collection from my childhood still existed, then that's something I think that really encouraged me to make that purchase at the toy store. And then the next day I went back and bought a bunch more. And it became a thing where I wanted to complete the collection. Then at that time, I just didn't know how to go about doing it, because once I, once I filled the holes in the collection from that toy store, then I didn't know where else to go. I would occasionally find things here and there, but that did awaken the collector in me. The adult collector was just by chance on that simple car trip. I think it's a good indication, a good example of the staying power of Star Wars. And then when you get old enough to start being nostalgic, then it had a bigger impact.
So, I mean, this was something I was going to ask about later, but I think now is probably a good juncture to bring it up. Is the sort of one of the things that's come up a lot in these conversations that I've been having recently in this series is the idea of the, I suppose you call it the mental health benefits of fandom.
Yeah.
And nostalgia, and how nostalgia can be positive, and it can be a negative thing. And I think particularly during this very tumultuous period, we've seen a lot. It's quite natural for people to retreat into the things that they feel comfortable. How do you feel about nostalgia? What's your view of it? Do you think that it's a positive or a negative, or what do you get from it? I'm just wondering what your feelings are around that topic in general, because I think that's kind of central to what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, I think traditions are important and need to be protected, because you don't ever want to forget where you came from. And so I think nostalgia works in a similar way. It's much different now, though, because we live in an era of franchises where nothing has a limited shelf life anymore. Back in the day, things would come and things would go. But nowadays, you can be nostalgic for something that's still new, like Star Wars. It's old, but it's new. You know, there's new Star Wars content coming out all the time. And so if you want to stay connected to the Star Wars of the past, that can be a little bit difficult. And that's where maybe nostalgia is challenging, is because over time, things are naturally going to evolve, no matter what it is. And the Star Wars that we get 20 years from now might be very, very different from the Star Wars that George Lucas was producing. And if we get so bogged down by our connection to nostalgia and then what we consider the integrity of everything, then that could really thwart our progress as fans, because we want everything to stay the same. And so that's where nostalgia can be really, really a slippery slope, I think. But I also think it's important to maintain tradition and integrity. And that all comes from, the foundation of things. And so you have to be prepared to move forward, but you also want to protect the integrity of what has come before. And so how do you do that? How do you do that? And that's, I think, something that challenges the Star Wars fan base on a whole these days.
Yeah, and the producers of the content as well. Jimmy, I just want to ask you a little bit about RebelForce Radio, of course. A bit of a two-part question here, really, because of the history of the show. And I'm just wondering if you could just take us through how you first sort of, as a radio professional as well. I don't know what your view of podcasts would have been back in the sort of the 2000s when podcasts were fledgling. But I'm just wondering how you first came to be involved with the Forcecast, and if you could also just tell us a little bit of how you transitioned into RebelForce Radio after doing that for a number of years.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, Star Wars is a huge passion of mine, but radio broadcasting is a huge passion of mine as well, and something that has been a career for me. And I relish the opportunity to combine two passions. When Attack of the Clones was coming out, this was back in 2002, there was a big Star Wars celebration convention in Indianapolis. And I was like, oh, Indianapolis, that's a 3-hour drive from Chicago. No problem. I'm there. And I acquired media credentials and found myself in the autograph hall talking to a lot of Star Wars actors and crew members on microphone, just recording little IDs for the radio station I was at. And I did a little bit of shtick with Warwick Davis, because there was a personality at the radio station I was at who we used to tease. We used to say he looked like Willow. And his name is Kevin Matthews. And back then he did look like Willow with the mullet and everything. It was actually some Chicago Bears who were the ones who started calling Kevin Willow and came up with the idea, wouldn't it be funny if people were telling Warwick that he looked like Kevin Matthews? So we recorded a bit where he was saying, no, I will not record. No, I will not do this. People always are saying I'm Kevin Matthews. And so tables turned, right? And Warwick loved it. He loved it. He had a lot of laughs with me and my brother. He gave us a bunch of autographs, pictures for free. He's like, give these guys whatever they want. He thought it was hilarious. And so I started getting bitten by the bug, and I wanted to then do a full Star Wars special for radio. And I just tucked that idea in my back pocket. And then by the time Revenge of the Sith rolled around, Star Wars Celebration Convention in Indianapolis again. So we loaded up the car and drove out there with microphones in hand, and a mission, though, not just to do silly shtick and get radio station IDs, but to actually do real interviews with some of these people. And so many were really generous with their time. David Prowse, Jeremy Bullock, Daniel Logan. These are the first time, and then these are people I've actually gotten to kind of know over the years, but who would have known that this is where it would all begin, And so I came back to the radio station with all of these recordings in hand, and I put together an hour special that we released the weekend just before Revenge of the Sith opened. I think Revenge of the Sith opened on a Wednesday night, so we would have released this show on Saturday morning. And it was cool because there was the lineup outside of, I guess it would have been McClure Court Theater in downtown Chicago, but that was going on everywhere where fans would line up for, a month or more before the film would open. They would camp out and line up, and then they would take contributions for charity and stuff. And this happened all over the place. There's some documentaries out there about some Hollywood fans doing it, but it happened in Chicago for sure. And I got to know some of the people in the line. And so I wasn't there, but they set up speakers out there so everyone could hear the Star Wars radio special that Saturday morning out at the line. And I thought that was cool. Somebody called me and they're like, yeah, we're listening to it out here. And I thought that was a lot of fun. And so that is like, wow, I had such a good time doing that because I'm doing like what I do professionally, and I'm mixing it with Star Wars, which is a passion from my childhood. And I'm just having a ball creating audio productions using Star Wars sounds and all that. And, so file that away, that show came and went. And then, Revenge of the Sith happened. And I thought, well, maybe this is the end, maybe this is the end. Where am I going to go with my Star Wars fandom from here? George Lucas made it clear he wasn't going to make any more movies. There's talk about an animated series, talk about a live action series, but is that going to be enough to lift up my fandom now in my late 30s? I thought it was just coming to an end, and I sort of lost a little bit of interest. And I'm a collector, so like maintaining my collection and stuff, that all just sort of felt like it was becoming water under the bridge. The following year, they announced that there was going to be another one of those Star Wars celebration conventions, this time in LA, to celebrate the 20th or 30th anniversary of Star Wars. So I got wind of this and I was like, interesting. They're going to do a Star Wars convention on a year there's no movie or nothing. This is interesting. So I didn't know if I was going to go, and I called my brother who had accompanied me on every Star Wars convention that I've ever gone to. And I called him and I said, hey, there's going to be this convention in LA. I don't know. And I just paused, and he goes, so it looks like we're going to LA. And I said, oh, I guess we're going to LA then. Okay, good. So he's on board. So I started getting excited about it. At this very time, podcasting was on the rise. And as a radio professional, I thought the idea of podcasting was like amateur hour. The podcasts I listened to sounded gross. I just thought it was mediocre amateur radio wannabes. And so I kind of was like snotty about it. But after there was the announcement that the convention was going to happen, I also started seeing these posts about the Forcecast on the Force.net website. Like, what's this all about? You know, they had another podcast that I listened to, and I was like, no, it was like the TFN podcast. And I listened to it. I'm like, no, this is exactly what I don't like about podcasting. You know, the amateur hour aspect of it. And listen, granted, I think I look back on that attitude and I think I was way wrong and totally a snob for thinking that way, because I think I was like a lot of radio people. I was feeling threatened by podcasting. This is also when satellite radio was on the rise. And it just felt like, you know, we just have to be broadcasters. We can't worry about all that other stuff that's going on out there. But I found myself in the car a lot. And I used to always listen to my wife was on a radio show in Chicago at this time in afternoon drive. So I would always listen to her show when I would drive home from work during rush hour. But she was taking a few weeks off, like several weeks off, because she got a knee replacement. So I was in the car with nothing to listen to. And I decided one day before leaving work, I said, I'll give this Forcecast a shot. And I didn't have an iPod or anything like that. So I had to burn a few CDs before I left to work and listen to them on my CD player.
Wow, podcast on CDs. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. This is 2006, late 2006, like November. And so I would drive home to the suburbs to get my kids, and then I drive back into the city to go visit my wife, who was recovering from knee surgery. And I just found myself in the car a lot for this week. And I burned these discs and I'd listen to them, and I burned more discs. And so I started working my way through their catalog, which at that point was only like 2 or 3 months old. They hadn't been around for very long. It was Jason Swank and Pete Nadel. And I listened to them. And by the end of that week, I listened to so just wall to wall. I binged their shows because I thought, wow, this is great. You know, people are talking about Star Wars. These are like the type of conversations I'd like to have with my friends. They're talking about things I've never heard anyone talk about. So I decided at the end of that week, I'm like, maybe I'll reach out and offer to help just to make their show sound better. I hear what they're doing, and I think I could take them from point A to point B and maybe even point C. I think I can do that. And I just wanted to help. I didn't want to necessarily, like weasel my way in or anything like that. And I knew the guys would sort of think that I was trying to, because at this point they were around for like 3 months and they were really starting to gain some momentum. And then all of a sudden I come in out of nowhere, Mr. Know-It-All, who's radio professional and all that. And so I was on guard for that. I was expecting some pushback from them, and I got a little bit. I actually was added to the staff then in late 2006. And it also gave me a venue to play a lot of audio that I had recorded at those conventions when I was gathering audio for the radio station. There was a lot of stuff I didn't use there. I had an old interview that I did with Billy D. Williams. And there were just other things I wanted to do, but I didn't want to weasel in on their show. And so I reached out to Dustin Roberts, who was the guy who was running the Force.net at that time. And he brought me on board for Jason and Pete's show. So I thought, again, I thought maybe they would take a little exception to that. And there was a little bit of reluctancy from those guys at first, but then that convention rolled around. And another reason why I wanted to podcast is because I knew that convention was going to happen. I just thought it would be cool to be able to walk up to like some of the tables at the in the room, and like if there's a TFN table, I could go there and say, "Hey, I'm Jimmy Mack," and they'd be like, "Oh, hey, nice to meet you." I'd be like, "Wow, I actually know people at these things," where it's not me and my brother against the world. And And so we went to the show in LA, and it was incredible how we just clicked. Me and Swank and Pete and my brother was there, and some of the other guys from Rebel Scum and the Force.net and Official Picks. It was just like, wow, what a cool crew. And we just hit it off so well. And so after that, then we really started collaborating together a lot, and things were just really clicking, and we were just having a good old time. And then 2008, Pete Nadel said he was going to walk away from the show. And so it's like, oh my God, that's it for the show. And I was trying to convince Pete not to leave. I was trying to convince Jason to carry on with the show by himself. And I was struggling with the idea that, well, maybe I would be a good co-host. I was like, how am I going to find the time to do that? And everything else. And then I was just talking to Jason one day on the show, on the phone after a show, and he was really bummed that Pete was going to be leaving. And I said, well, maybe I can just co-host with you. He's like, oh my God, I would love that. I wanted to ask you, but I was afraid to ask you. And I said, no, let's give it a shot. So Pete left the show. And then the next week I was just sitting in the co-host chair. We didn't make any announcements about it. I didn't say I was replacing Pete. Pete was pretty popular. It was big shoes to fill. I didn't know if how that would go over. And it took some time for the listeners to get used to me being there. But it was a short period, really, before we really found like we were onto something really good that was going to have some legs. We did some live shows from conventions in Dallas, because the Force.net is their home office is in Dallas. And so we did some stuff out there, and it was like, wow, people really like this stuff. And we're getting to know a lot of the insiders at Lucasfilm, and getting along with people too. And that's when Lucasfilm started to notice us, and we became a big part of their marketing plan then for the Clone Wars, which a lot of people don't remember, but the Clone Wars wasn't exactly universally well received when it launched. People were very skeptical about it. Everything from Ahsoka to the animation style to just the way George Lucas was rolling it out. It wasn't necessarily, he wasn't releasing episodes in chronological order. It would jump around a lot. It was herky-jerky. And the movie wasn't well received. I think that's what hurt the series the most, was they did a theatrical release for the debut of the Clone Wars. It didn't resonate with Star Wars fans or the box office. And so by the time the series debuted, it was already behind the 8 ball. And we were getting to know people, actors and crew members, and Dave Filoni actually listened to the podcast. And that summer when Pete left the show, I had traveled out to Star Wars Celebration Japan with Official Picks. And I went out there for the purpose of interviewing every actor that was out there. And I did that. And also really got to know a lot of people from Lucasfilm, because all the English speaking people tended to stick together in Japan, So I got to, and that's what Dave Filoni said to me. He's like, yeah, I listened to your show. It was the first time I ever met him.
It's funny, that platform that you gave the creatives of the Clone Wars, I think really can't be underestimated. And I say this as an outsider, is I got to know Ashley and Dave through your show. And I think that the humanizing of that production staff must have been very valuable to Lucasfilm during that period. Yeah,
it was, because they didn't have anything like that. Their online presence was very limited, because the technology was all emerging. And nobody really, and social media and all of that stuff. When I first started podcasting, to me, it was an extension of broadcasting. Now, I don't think anyone can debate when I say that it's an extension of social media. It clearly has evolved that way. And it just took a lot of people time to figure out what to do with it. And Lucasfilm was the same way. And we would encourage them. We would say, you guys should be broadcasting these panels from these conventions. You should be doing stuff on YouTube. And they had a few false starts, but they mostly farmed that stuff out to us and let us do it all. And I think they liked that. They liked having a pillar in the fan base be their mouthpiece. And I think it worked for them. And
I think the content was there as well. I mean, I think in some ways, your Clone Wars Roundtable episodes are some of the deepest dives into the mythology of Star Wars that are available.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate you saying that, because I've been re-listening to those shows. And sometimes I'm like, wow, I can't believe I said that. Like that sounded pretty clever. And you said it. So, I mean, and everyone else, our guests were much more clever than I was. Trust me on that. But it is that where I can listen to those things and say, wow, we really had some great conversations there. And I think it meant a lot. It meant a lot for them to market the show. I think we were more valuable to them than convention appearances or anything. Any mainstream coverage it would come and go, but we were always there.
And how did that transition into being Rebel Force Radio and sort of moving to be an independent production occur?
Well, there's a few things, but mostly it was the sale of Lucasfilm to Disney and the announcement that new movies were coming. And it was just the calm before the storm when that announcement happened, and we knew the storm was coming. So we wanted to handle the next era of Star Wars on our own terms. With the Forcecast, it wasn't our show. It was our show. We handled all aspects of the production. But at the end of the day, we still had to answer to higher ups. We would occasionally have people telling us what to do and say and things like that. And it just got to the point where we really wanted to take ownership of everything we did ourselves, because the fulfillment of doing a great show and a great production was always there. But there was something lacking, and that was the ownership. We couldn't take ownership of our stuff. And so with Rebel Force Radio, we knew that there would be 1,000 Star Wars podcasts just popping up out of the ground left and right. And I think it was just important for us to establish our own thing at that time.
I mean, there are several things I believe that make your show and its place in fandom quite unique. I think one of those, of course, is the longevity. But I think also obviously the size of your listenership, the diversity of stuff that you do as well. I mean, obviously you have your Patreon, but you also, as you say, have a lot of events, and there's a lot of that stuff going on as well. I'm just wondering, as far as and I realize obviously talking about Star Wars fandom can be somewhat of a slippery slope, but I'm just wondering how you feel about your place in fandom, because to me as an outsider, it sometimes feels that Rebel Force Radio is kind of its own nation state in many ways. I suppose what I'm asking is, how connected do you feel to that larger fandom? Where do you feel? Are you an island, or are you part of the continent?
Okay. Well, that's a good question. I think we are, we're part of the big picture. Obviously we want to make our conversations as mainstream as possible. I don't think that we are as committed to the hardcore Star Wars fan base as we are to all Star Wars fans. And we want to have that door held open to anyone who's the most casual fan to someone who is the most ravenous. And so there was a time, you see, because we've been doing this for so long, when we started podcasting, we were the only ones really doing it. And so wherever we went, we were the podcast guys. And sometimes I miss those days, sometimes I miss those days. And so over the years, there's been a lot of different ways for us to connect to the Star Wars fan base on a whole. And sometimes that would mean we would be partnered up with other websites or other shows or Lucasfilm themselves, conventions, promoters, you name it. But it just seems like things got to a point maybe 5 or 6 years ago where it was best to kind of close up our circle a little bit and make sure that we were doing things that were honest to ourselves and our listeners and our families and you name it. So I think that's when you can say maybe we became an island a little bit, where we didn't necessarily feel the need to be lumped in with all the other websites and podcasts and you name it. There's a lot of organized groups, the cosplayers and all of that stuff. I feel that it's best for us just to march to the beat of our own drum and not become part of some big group think conglomerate that is policing, because let's face it, that's the reason, one of the big reasons why we went independent in the first place was because we wanted to have ownership over what we did. We wanted to have total independence. And the way I look at it nowadays is that there's a lot of Star Wars platforms out there, and they have their platforms and we have ours. And that's probably the best way to go about it.
One of the great benefits of Star Wars as a piece of storytelling, as a universe, is that it's intergenerational. But I suppose from a fandom perspective, that can be a negative. Do you feel, is there a generation gap in the fandom?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I was hearing these younger fans, guys in their 20s talking about the original Star Wars and talking about how boring it is and things like that. I'm like, okay, well, I mean, I can't even have conversations with people like that. So there has to be a recognition of where Star Wars comes from and maybe a little bit of reverence, because that original film was that's up there with the all-time American great film classics. You think about Casablanca and Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, and Star Wars. I mean, that is how great of a film that is.
It's funny you mentioned earlier on the toys and the idea that there was this spread of interest in your young mind when you first watched Star Wars. And of course, my children are now at the age where I'm starting to watch the films with them. And there is something about that original film that is almost transcendent, I suppose. It's hard to explain. I mean, I remember when I was a child, the way I learned about it was I was very lucky. When I was 4 years old, my mother was the manager of a toy shop.
Oh my God.
So, I mean, I won the parent lottery there. She brought home in the summer of 77 a toy R2-D2. And I remember just, without any context, being mesmerized by this thing. There was this archetypal power to those images that I think can kind of transcend that. So as you say, to hear that in the fandom, it's interesting. I'm also a very, hate to say this, but I'm a very big Star Trek fan as well. And boy, if you think that the disrespect for the source material with Star Wars is vociferous,
yeah,
the way you can spend a day on a Star Trek Facebook page and see nothing but criticism of the supposed misogyny in the original series, because I think that there is a culture now that struggles with being able to perhaps place things within their historical context.
Right.
And, exactly. Which seems like a basic thing to be able to do, but I don't know, some people seem to struggle with that. And I suppose one of the things, one of the parts of your gig as well is that you manage a community.
Yes.
How is that? How is the community management element of the work that you do for RebelForce Radio?
Well, it's been interesting because I've had a real weird relationship with all of that stuff. I've gone through long stretches of time where I won't even touch social media, but I've learned how to rein it all in. The biggest mistake I made for several years was allowing other people to run things. And like with Facebook groups and things like that, I find that there's this consistency with whenever we set up shop somewhere, that the amount of the conversation and the respect people have for each other is all very much on par with with our philosophies and the way we like to run the show. But it would always just kind of unravel because of the influx of outside influences and other jealous podcasters and people who have their own niche in the fan base and stuff. And so I bounced around from one Facebook group to the next until I finally said, you know what, enough of this. I'm going to take control of this myself and just make our own Facebook group. We used to have an unofficial Facebook group, which rose up out of the ashes of our original Facebook group, which crashed and burned because of, like I said, the influx of some undesirables and then people, you know, stabbing us in the back a little too. It's complicated to talk about because it's without going into detail and stuff, and I don't really like to. Because Lucasfilm will play favorites with people, and then that will pit groups against each other. And so we primarily removed ourselves from a lot of that stuff. But you know, we still see missiles come across our bow. But I have to say, so I finally got to a point where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to run a group. I always want to keep a distance because I didn't know, you know, I didn't think that I would be getting fair conversation if I was always there watching. I feel like, you know, I want to hear what people really think. And boy, back in the days of the old group, I really heard what they think. I mean, it was unfiltered.
Careful what you wish for, right?
Yeah. But I mean, still at the same time, there's a lot of value to get out of conversations like that too. I'm very open-minded and flexible and stuff. But I just decided to create our own Facebook group, and that's been the best thing ever because then it truly carries on with the sort of vibe that I like. And I find that my existence there or interference doesn't stop people from having really good conversations. So that's the RebelForce Radio official Facebook group. You can find it. You'll be asked 2 questions if you want to join. Who are the hosts of RebelForce Radio, and what's your favorite RFR moment?
I'm very aware of the fact that we're running out of time here, Jimmy. So on a time-related note, how do you find the time for all of this? How do you run this? I mean, I do 2 podcasts, and you know, I'm already sort of can hear the restless natives at the door wanting to go out swimming and all of these other things. How do you do it?
I'm a little bit of a workaholic. I'm very driven. And because I've been doing audio production since the mid 80s, you know, back in the day when I'd be hovered over a reel-to-reel deck with a razor blade, cutting tape and stuff. I mean, I just, it's second nature to me. I don't have to think about it. It just happens. And so, and I like it. I like, it's just what I do. And so I spend a lot of time in the studio working. I have a home studio, which is this. And, you know, my family gives me space. But I have to find time for them. I get lost. I follow my momentum too much. And then I end up, you know, spending too much time working, and I'm trying to control that more and more because it's more than just the podcast and stuff. I work for a radio Hall of Famer, a guy named Jonathan Brandmeier, who's been a radio legend for, you know, I've been with him for 30 years. And I do other stuff. I produce commercials and things like that. The thing I love doing the most, though, is the Star Wars stuff. That's the best stuff. I really enjoy that. And so how do I find the time? There's some sacrifice. I don't have little kids anymore, which helps. Because back in the day, I used to do it like overnight. I would work overnight because everyone would go to bed so early. So that would give me all the time.
So that's how you do it. Just extreme sleep deprivation.
It's been that way in the past. There were times when I would really just like operate on the average of like 4 hours a night, wow. You know, but it's not recommended. I don't do that anymore. I do. I'm too old for it, you know.
One last thing, Jimmy, just before you go, and again, thanks so much for your generosity of time and how sharing and open and fun you've been. I just wanted to ask, as I've been podcasting myself now for probably about 13 or 14 years, but I've been listening to you guys for longer than that, and it's been interesting listening to your trajectory. The first time you guys spoke to Carl Newman, for example, and then the first time you had interactions with seeing you go from talking to Star Wars artists to people involved in the production, and just this ascent. I'm just wondering what the most sort of pinch me moment was, the moment where you just thought, wow, this really is something now. What that moment or moments were.
Would that be a moment on the show or just an opportunity that the show presented me?
Either or.
Well, the pinch me moment, there's a few of them. I mean, I went to a dinner banquet with George Lucas once and got a few minutes with him. I hung out with him for like an hour and a half. And that was something else. But I mean, that's just like, when you're fishing, and you just get a good bite. But like the stuff that really resonates with me, are some visits I made to Skywalker Ranch, which was, that's like, oh my God, I just love Northern California so much. Marin County, just the whole area. But to go to Skywalker and to hang out and, sing around the piano that John Williams plays when he's there, and look at all the artwork there, and go to Ben Burt's studio, and I played with the synthesizer he used to make the R2 voice.
Wow, so for an audiophile such as yourself, I mean, gosh.
Oh my God. So I was doing that, and he's got a display cabinet that has the scuba regulator that he used to create the Darth Vader breathing and all of that stuff. And spending time at Skywalker Sound. One time I went to Lucas Animation to visit Dave Filoni, and he said, well, you want to see the episode that's going to be airing this weekend? And I go, yeah, sure. So he takes me into the back into a little screening room, and he has a guy reel up the next film, and he's going to sit there and watch the episode with me, just me and him in this little screening room. And right as the lights go down, he goes, hey, you're sitting in George's seat. And I was like, what? And so I just sat, I couldn't even think straight for the next 20 something minutes while I was watching this episode. And the lights came up, and Filoni's like, so what'd you think? And I was just like, so right before I left, I floated a little air biscuit into that seat for George, just a little surprise for George.
Yeah, it's, I mean, gosh, that the 8-year-old child that you described earlier on, seeing the name George Lucas and thinking, wow, somebody makes these things, must have been high-fiving you across the space-time continuum when that was happening.
Yeah. See, like, to me, it's more exciting to sit in his seat than it is to actually meet the guy. I like, wow, I'm sitting in George's. This is where he reviews every episode of the Clone Wars, and I'm going to sit here and do it, just like he does. Having Billy D. Williams hug me once was, that was very cool.
Yeah. Having some of that rub off on you must be, you must have been good for a while. You remember those deodorant adverts in the 80s where the women would be flocking to the men?
Yeah. I had that impact for the next hour. Women were following me everywhere, just because he rubbed off so much cool onto me. But really, that's like, great for me. But the best part is really being able to connect with an international audience of Star Wars fans and have that being part of my day-to-day existence now, and being able to share my passion with so many people. The amount of friends I've made, guys like you, I mean, it's like, how would I ever meet people like you without Star Wars? It just would have never happened.
I mean, as somebody who lives in New Zealand, where we don't get a lot unless it's Lord of the Rings related.
Yeah.
There's not very much. It's very difficult to get out. So I mean, just to wrap things up, Jimmy, I just want to thank you so much for your time and all your work. But first and foremost, thank you for just being so inclusive and so sharing with the experiences that you have. I mean, when you record yourself in your car driving onto the ranch, we're there, we're chewing to your hand when you're doing that. And I think that that's what we get from Rebel Force Radio that we simply cannot get anywhere else. So I'd just like to say a big thank you for joining us on the show here, and certainly suggest to any of our listeners, if there are any who aren't already listening to Rebel Force Radio, listen to them. And if you already are, join their Patreon as well, so you can listen to all of those older shows and some of the great offshoot shows, like Star Wars Oxygen, which is a wonderful podcast, a great library piece to have in your collection. So thanks again, Jimmy. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. And thank you for all the kind words, and best of luck to you and your show.